Everyone heard that? Recording in progress, good. It's the disclaimer that they put in now. I'm going to go hide in the background, but I'll be watching, listening.
Esba, do we have, oh, sorry, I see, never mind, sorry, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today. My name is Gina Grandy, and I am the Dean of the Hill and Levine Schools of Business at University of Regina. I'm pleased to welcome you to the WEKH webinar, Saskatchewan Indigenous Women Entrepreneurship, a Conversation. I'm joining you today from Treaty 4 territory. University of Regina is located on Treaty 4 territory, the traditional homeland of the Cree, Dene, Lakota, Nakota, Dakota, Saulteaux, and Métis Nation. The land acknowledgement is important but insufficient in demonstrating our commitment to truth and reconciliation. And it seems particularly insufficient right now, given the recent discovery of unmarked graves in BC and right here in Saskatchewan. We talked about whether or not we should reschedule the webinar because of the tragedies that have surfaced this past month. But the panelists felt it was important to move forward and provide an outlet of support for Indigenous women entrepreneurs. And I thank them for this, and I thank all of you for being here today. I know that some of our panelists and our speakers are joining us from other territories and may also want to acknowledge the land from which they are joining us. So I'll call on them if they'd like to do that. Cree or Monica?
Morning, everyone. My name is Monica Burnett, and I'm joining you from Treaty 6 territory, Saskatchewan area, and I'm also on the homeland of the Metis.
Anyone else?
Good morning. My name is Tracy Tinker. I would like to acknowledge that I'm situated on the homeland of the Métis Nation, Buffalo Narrows, and Treaty 10 territory.
Thank you, Tracy.
Hi, everyone. I'm joining you all today from Treaty 1 territory, which is the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation.
Thank you, everyone. We'll be together for the next 70 minutes or so, and we are going to start in a few minutes with a presentation on a national analysis of Indigenous women's entrepreneurship, a short presentation so that we then can have a discussion, questions based on the findings of that report. And then we're going to have a follow-up panel discussion for about 30 minutes and a follow-up Q&A based on their experiences as it relates to the findings of the report, but more broadly as well as it relates to Indigenous women's entrepreneurship. If you have questions throughout the session, about a couple of options. You can put them in the Q&A feature as early as possible so we make sure we have them. But I'm also going to say to you that if you prefer to use the chat, we will keep an eye on the chat box as well to see if anything surfaces there. And as we move through the session, we'll make sure that we come back to those questions and comments. You will have also received a notice that the session is being recorded, and we will follow up in sharing this as the webinar following today's event. Before we dig into the presentation that Ashley is going to support, they've just told me that the chat function has been disabled, so you will have to use the Q&A function for your questions. So please make sure you do use that. We don't want to miss any questions that you have, and I apologize for that confusion. We have with us today, first I'm going to acknowledge Asba, who is our co-op student and the student coordinator for WEKH Saskatchewan. And Asba has done all of the hard work in organizing today's session. So thank you and welcome, Asba. Ashley Richard from the National Indigenous Outreach and Partnership Development Lead at WEKH is joining us, and Ashley is going to be one of our presenters and engage in the conversation. We also have Kara Thorvaldsen, the Indigenous Research Strategy at WEKH, who also was involved in the research project on Indigenous women's entrepreneurship in Canada. We are also joined by Monica Burnett. I don't know, Monica, if you want to just do a wave, the Community Economic Development and Community Engagement Officer at Saskatchewan Métis Economic Development Corporation. We have with us Cree Chichu, the Business Development Officer for the Contribution Program at the Saskatchewan Indian Equity Foundation. Cree, I don't know if you want to give just a little wave. We also have with us two Indigenous women entrepreneurs, Kayla Rosaski Marasti, and leading entrepreneur and founder of the Matriarch Made, a beading company, and the Comeback Society, a podcast. And last but certainly not least, we also have Tracy Tinker joining us, who runs 2 businesses in Buffalo Narrows, the Waterfront Inn and the Pelican Tavern, and Tinker's Camp. So I want to thank them all for making time here today to talk about this very important topic and to share their experiences. So without any further from me, I'd like for us to jump in, and I'm going to invite Ashley Richard to share the findings of the National Study on Indigenous Women's Entrepreneurship. So over to you, Ashley.
Of course, Mmiwg for that introduction. Bonjour, anin tanse kakagekwen Indigenous. My given name is Ashley Richard, and my spirit name is Forever Woman. And I'm really excited to be here today, joining everyone in Saskatchewan in sharing some of the work that we've been doing over the past year and the findings from this report. So WEKH is all about building an inclusive innovation ecosystem for women entrepreneurs. And my role as the national lead for Indigenous engagement is ensuring that Indigenous women are included in the future of this inclusive innovation ecosystem. So the inclusive innovation ecosystem looks at entrepreneurship from all 3 levels, going right from the individual up to the societal. So for Indigenous women at the societal level, this would include things like government policies that influence Indigenous entrepreneurship or socioeconomic trends of urban Indigenous populations or on reserve Indigenous populations. And then we move to the organizational level. So this would include things like colleges or universities, financial institutions or Aboriginal financial institutions, or really any of those organizations that are working to support Indigenous women directly. And then at the individual level, we have the entrepreneurs themselves. So our name for WEKH, our traditional name is Mmiwg, which is Anishinaabe for Ice Bear Woman. And this name was given to us in ceremony last year at Mmiwg Bald Eagle Lodge by Elder Margaret Lavallee of Saugeen First Nation. And as she explained it to us, the name represents the spirit of strength and resiliency. And this is the spirit that can be found within Indigenous women entrepreneurs, as well as alongside them throughout their journey. So when we held a series of roundtables last year, collecting the perspectives of organizations and Indigenous women to see, what are the challenges and barriers that you faced as an Indigenous woman, and what would you like to see? What does the future of an inclusive innovation ecosystem look like for you? And so we explained that to a graphic designer. Her name is Megan. She's an Indigenous woman from Alberta. Her company is called Crossing Design. We explained to her the meaning of our spirit name and the information that we wanted to collect and, what the inclusive innovation ecosystem means. And she came up with the concept for the cover of the report, which is pictured here. So you can see there's a woman and she's looking towards the WEKH logo, and the WEKH logo is representative of all organizations. And then the mountains in between symbolize the challenges and barriers that an Indigenous woman might face along her journey. And the way that the woman and the bear are facing are symbolic as well. And we were just so honored that Megan was able to create this beautiful graphic for us. And we'll be sharing links to the report in the chat, and you can look at the full description here is also included in the first 2 pages of the report. So we held 16 roundtables to collect this information, bringing together just over 350 participants and 44 organizational partners across the country. And from these discussions, we identified 12 groups of barriers, which I'm going to discuss in a bit more detail. On May 27th was when we held our Saskatchewan Indigenous Women Entrepreneurship Roundtable, and we were able to partner with a number of organizations in the Saskatchewan innovation ecosystem to help invite Indigenous women to the table and to just make sure that this voice was included. These are the logos of all the different partners from across the country who were able to support the Roundtables initiative. And, from the initial roundtables, many of these organizations have continued to work with us today. We've established MOUs with some of these organizations, and some of them are still, championing the work that we're doing with WEKH. So the roundtables were more than collecting information. It was also really pivotal in the initial partnership and outreach development we were doing. So the different barriers, the barriers that we identified, they can be really similar for many entrepreneurs. I think what's different with these is the added layer of complexity that Indigenous women face as it relates to these barriers. So we discussed financial barriers. These were often the first to come up at every roundtable. Stereotypes and biases that are associated with entrepreneurship, sometimes even things like the language we're using can be alienating to Indigenous women. They don't identify with, entrepreneurship or startup culture because there are stereotypes in that culture. Like sometimes you're thinking of Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg, and you don't identify with that. So just making sure that when we're being inclusive in the language that we're using, so that Indigenous women can see themselves as entrepreneurs. Balancing family and community roles was a huge one because there were many Indigenous women who took on positions of leadership in their community, or they're taking care of elders, mothers, taking care of other family members. They take on so many roles that sometimes being a business owner has to come last. So any programs that are supporting Indigenous women entrepreneurs need to be mindful of the different roles and backgrounds that Indigenous women are bringing to the table. A lack of confidence at the end there. It's not to say, it would actually be very incorrect to say that Indigenous women lack confidence and that's a barrier. What that actually means is, as a result of all of these compounding and sometimes negatively reinforcing barriers, that affects an Indigenous woman's confidence in her ability to run a business. But Indigenous women have the knowledge and the capability to run successful ventures. It's up to the innovation ecosystem just to provide them with the resources to make sure that they can make their dreams come true. The financial barriers are more than just accessing capital. We really need to start by addressing the overall relationship that Indigenous women have with money. It's starting with personal finances, or money can be a triggering subject for some. So just working to unpack that before you even get into any business or technical finance capabilities. And then we identified the financial barriers as either social capital, technical competencies, or the supply side. So this chart here are some of the more specifics that we talked about, and this chart you can find in the report as well. We also thought it was important to showcase vignettes throughout our report. So there's 10 different vignettes of Indigenous women across the country who are doing wildly different businesses and all successful and all reclaiming their identity and heritage through the business that they're running. And, there was this notion of the collectivity among all of the businesses that they were running. So Charlene Sanjanco is a great example. She's from British Columbia, and she runs Powerhouse Media. And the quote from her was, "Media is our most powerful influence of change when it's used for its highest purpose. And that is exactly the work and the impact we are here to make in the world." And so that's essentially the work that she's doing with Powerhouse Media. And we're so happy to have Charlene as one of our partners. There's many political and systemic barriers, more than we could even get into in this report. We touched on it at a high level, but the Indian Act is a huge impediment to business development on reserve. And again, just in here, there was 12 different groups of barriers identified under the political and systemic category. We probably could have written an entire report just on this subject alone. And it's 3 times as complex to start a business on reserve as opposed to off reserve, just with all the different ban policy regulations and land title limitations and the Indian Act barriers that are presented. Also, another important note is that the Indian Act really pertains to registered Indians or First Nations, but Métis and Inuit communities are also affected not by the Indian Act, but sometimes by similar legislation. We held 2 roundtables that were national in scope. One was bringing creative Indigenous women to the table, and another was bringing Francophone Indigenous women to the table. We thought it was important to add this intersectional lens because creative entrepreneurs are sometimes not thought of as being entrepreneurs, even though they're very entrepreneurial in the activities that they're doing. And at the Francophone roundtable, we held that in French. We were able to discuss the barriers that, even just not French, but any other language barriers that might present themselves. So when we only present national programs unilingually or in English, this actually excludes large populations that maybe speak French as their first language or maybe an Indigenous language. When asked about the future of an inclusive innovation ecosystem, the 2 main themes that came up were Indigenous women really would like to see a relational versus a transactional approach among the ecosystem. So taking time to build those relationships, and a future that's by Indigenous for Indigenous. So really seeing Indigenous women in these positions of influence over Indigenous women's entrepreneurship. The report ends with over 30 recommendations that organizations from different sectors can implement to better make their programming suitable for Indigenous women. One example is, building childcare into organizations so that motherhood is not a barrier to success. It's important that as an inclusive innovation ecosystem, we are continuing to create spaces like the one today and the roundtables so that Indigenous women can share their voices. To address the barriers discussed in the report, the ecosystem needs to develop meaningful and long-lasting relationships with Indigenous women entrepreneurs. If you're attending today as an individual and not an organization, these are some of the resources online that you can check out. Do share the report with your networks. Encourage Indigenous women to get involved with the Indigenous Lift Circle. Shop online at the Facebook Marketplace or indigenmall.net, and encourage entrepreneurs to network on the sharing platform. Mmiwg, and I'm open to any questions that anyone might have at this time.
Ashley, I'm going to ask you a question to get us started. And before I do that, I am going to encourage people, please, if you do have questions for Ashley about the study, the report findings, to put them in the Q&A function, please. That would be the easiest way for us to manage them. Ashley, I'm curious if you were surprised by any of the findings, and in what ways?
Surprised. I'd say no. I wouldn't say surprised. I was empowered by the conversations that we'd had, but I think a lot of the themes that came out in the report were things that I'd been living and breathing for a long time. And I think a lot of the other women on the panel and speakers today can attest to that as well. These are conversations that we've been having as a community for a long time. So it was nice to finally be able to put this into a report with a national scope and invite the non-Indigenous ecosystem into the conversation. One point that sticks out to me a lot was at the Creative Indigenous Women's Roundtable was how strong their ties to culture came through. Like they really saw the art that they were creating as a reclamation of their identity and culture, and that it's the first thing I think of because it was beautiful.
Ashley, were there, you made reference to some of the distinct, challenges and barriers that in the creative, as well as our Francophone Indigenous women entrepreneurs. Were there any of those that also stood out for you? Or even if we think across the country, did you see any distinctions around the experiences that some Indigenous women entrepreneurs face? So for example, what you heard in Saskatchewan, let's say compared to what you might have heard on the East Coast.
The biggest distinction was definitely between the provinces and the territories. So, you know, this report is a national look at Indigenous women's entrepreneurship. So there was only so much we can get into. But when working with communities in the North, it's an entirely different conversation. And even among the three territories, the conversations between the three become also so diverse. With Saskatchewan, I'm reflecting back on the roundtable discussion that we had. I found that the conversation reflected a really strong level of readiness. And that happened at a lot of the roundtables. And what I mean by that is the organizations that came to the table were already supporting Indigenous women, or they were really eager to get that started. And the conversations were very participatory. They flowed very naturally. So that was really nice to see that everybody is on the same page in terms of, okay, we're all at the starting line. How can we make this the best possible moving forward?
Thank you. We have a question from Jesse, and Jesse asks, you mentioned that Métis and Inuit face challenges similar to those posed by the Indian Act through other legislation. Can you provide more detail on that? So, and also, what is some of the legislation outside of the Indian Act that has been identified as a barrier?
I mean, there's so many. When you look at even entrepreneurship in the Northern Territories, for example, some communities are self-governing. Status and non-status isn't necessarily a thing in some communities in the territories. And Métis communities, I think it's important to make a distinction when we're talking about funding, when we're having conversations about providing funding for Indigenous entrepreneurs. What does that really mean? Do you mean you're providing funding for First Nations entrepreneurs? Because sometimes it can actually be exclusionary to just say Indigenous and require a status card, for example, because Métis persons are not going to have a status card, and even non-status Indians, and I only say Indian because I'm speaking specifically in context to the Indian Act, they're not going to have a status card either. So these are the types of things that you need to think about even when just writing your program eligibility.
Thank you, Ashley. Ashley, as you reflect on the findings and the recommendations of the report, are there any unanswered questions about the experiences of Indigenous women entrepreneurs in Canada or related areas where we need to know more? So, as you know, you've tremendous number of conversations you've had, and you talked about with the barriers and the political and systemic barriers, and you said you could have written a report just on that. But as you reflect on the project as a whole, what outstanding questions are there where you say we need to know more about this, or we need more work happening in this particular area?
I'd say we need to dive deeper into the specifics of building relationships and supporting entrepreneurs in the territories. There's also, related to that, but this is also true for the provinces, supporting rural and remote Indigenous women entrepreneurs can be a challenge when we're looking at internet and connectivity issues. So in the era of COVID-19, it's a huge benefit that, Kara and I didn't have to fly to Saskatchewan. We didn't have to book a whole in-person event to do this. We're doing this today on Zoom, from our offices or our homes, but there's still many who are excluded because their internet connectivity is limited, or with everybody being at home, they have a limited number of devices that they can use to access the internet. So that is really something to keep in mind when moving forward so that the digital divide doesn't get any bigger than it is right now.
Thank you. Actually, the question I have now may be a bit of an unfair question because, you've talked about looking across Canada and also acknowledging that, despite similarities in some of the challenges and barriers and experiences, there are great distinctions as well that we see. Based on the report and your ongoing work, what piece of advice might you offer to Indigenous women entrepreneurs who are joining us today?
For Indigenous women entrepreneurs specifically, I can't even stress the importance of networking and just, meeting other Indigenous women. Like I know Monica, for example, she's here today representing SMEDCO, but she's an entrepreneur herself with years of experience. And that's something that you find a lot with Indigenous women who are working in these programs that are supporting other Indigenous women entrepreneurs. They also bring that lived experience to the table themselves. And there's so many Indigenous women across the country who really just want to see us all succeed. Like we're not in competition with one another. We're only as strong as our community. So just, taking the plunge, meeting other Indigenous women in the network, I think that can really just exponentially do so much for your business.
Great, thank you. I asked the question about, what would you say to Indigenous women entrepreneurs, but what might you say to those who are in organizations that can help facilitate, create for Indigenous women entrepreneurs? And I would also say for those of us who might be here who are committed and want to play an important role, but are non-Indigenous, and what role do we have and can we have?
Mm-hmm. Definitely read the report, but with the understanding that the report is really just providing you with a base level of knowledge required to support Indigenous women and Indigenous entrepreneurs. Definitely read the TRC calls to action, read the TRC executive summary. When I say even Indigenous women entrepreneurs bring so many roles to them or to the table with them, we're also bringing the lived experiences of being an Indigenous person. So even if we look in relation to all the news that's coming out right now with residential schools across the country, that's knowledge that we've all had for decades. And organizations really need to have this foundational knowledge to begin that, to begin building a relationship that's built on empathy and understanding. So there is a lot of work and learning that comes along with supporting Indigenous women entrepreneurs, but in the end, it only serves to benefit absolutely everybody.
Thank you. And, again, highlighting the responsibility that, as non-Indigenous members that we have as well, and making that effort and that commitment to increase our own knowledge so that we are also better informed. Thank you. I am going to open up one more time if there are other questions for Ashley about the report, and then we will move to our panelist for a conversation. Now, Ashley is staying with us so that if questions emerge along the way, you certainly will have that opportunity as well. Not seeing any right now, Ashley. I'm going to thank you very much for sharing the key findings and your insights and being here today. And I look forward to you being part of our ongoing conversation as we move forward with the other parts of the conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gina. And I just wanted to shout out that my earrings today that I'm wearing are Matriarch Made by Kayla Rostesky-Morasti.
Thank you. And that's a lovely segue into our panelists that are here. As you know, we have 4 panelists. I'm going to start with 2 of our panelists, Kayla and Tracy. So Ashley, a very nice segue. And, both Kayla and Tracy run several businesses. And I'm wondering to start if you can both tell us a little bit about your businesses and if the findings of the report resonate with your experiences of starting and growing your businesses as Indigenous women entrepreneurs, and in what ways. So Kayla, if you're okay, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tanse Kayla Rostesky-Morasti, Nitsikasun, Pinehouse Lake, Virginia. My name is Kayla Rostesky-Morasti. I'm from Pinehouse Lake. I am the founder and My business is called Matriarch Made. I make earrings. I'm wearing a pair of mine as well today. I work full time. I'm a single mom. And so beading is kind of something that I started to do as a little bit of a side income. And I've just been diving deeper and deeper into my business with the help of some really cool mentors. It's been quite the journey so far. So I'm still very new to entrepreneurship. But yeah, definitely, I can definitely relate to balancing family life. That's really tough as an Indigenous person. We definitely, as women, we take on sometimes family needs and caring for our families and extra activities like that. So that's definitely been something that I can relate to. Also in the report, when you think of an entrepreneur, you may mostly think of like a white male. When growing up, like education was stressed, and I do have a degree. I'm an educator, but entrepreneurship wasn't really something that I seen that I could do. And I do think that representation is so important, and same with networking. So just kind of on my own little journey, just being able to see other Indigenous women in those positions and with their own businesses has just been so beneficial.
Thank you, Kayla. Tracy, tell us about your businesses and the parts of the report, if any, speak to your experiences.
Yeah, I will. Thank you very much. We've been in business for a number of years. We started an outfitting camp in 2005. I kind of took, I didn't take a leading role, but I was in a supporting role with my husband, and I did a lot of the work behind the scenes. In 2011, I took the plunge and left full-time employment and went into another business here in Buffalo. Taking that leap of faith, I guess, when I left a full-time paying position with all of the benefits that come along with it, and going into business for myself was very stressful, very I didn't know if I was going to succeed. There was a lot of stresses with family and making sure that I succeeded. There was a lot that depended on it. The report, there was a few things that really resonated with me when we think about some of the barriers that we face. Back when we first started the outfitting camp, it wasn't common practice that Aboriginal people own their own outfitting camps. So there was a lot of misconceptions when we had non-Aboriginal clients coming into our place, that they automatically assumed that we were either the cook, the cleaner, or the laborer in the camp. And we're kind of taken aback a bit when they found out that we owned and operated our own business. So that was one of the barriers that kind of resonated with me. Another thing is lack of mentorship, I guess, because when we started in 2005, I thought we were the first outfitting camp in our area. There was another, but there was no support in terms of who do you go to, who do you talk to get the licenses and all of that fun stuff. And it was a real learning curve, a lot of information finding, a lot of phone calls that needed to be made to try and understand the ins and outs. We kind of went in it blind, and but we didn't give up. We continued on our journey, and we have a successful, well, 2 businesses now.
Thank you, Tracy. Tracy, when you think about your experiences in starting and growing those businesses. Is there anything that, that you felt wasn't accounted for in the report? So when you think about some of those challenges and barriers or opportunities, specific possibly to Saskatchewan, but also maybe just specific to your experiences, is there anything else that you think, this is something else that needs to be on our radar?
A little bit, I guess, that where I think that still kind of lacks is the support. It has gotten a lot better. We have tons of support now through agencies like SMETCO and through our Métis Nation that are coming out more to the area and in offering different types of supports to businesses. So in the beginning that wasn't there, and really needs to be there for anyone wishing to start up on their own.
Great, thank you. And Kayla, how about you? Anything based on your experiences that you think we need to consider in Saskatchewan that wasn't covered in the report?
No, I think the report did a really amazing job. Like I said, I'm so new to entrepreneurship. So I've just found the amount of resources so far that have been tossed my way have been a little overwhelming to sort through. But thankfully, I have some really good mentors, so they've been helping me out quite a bit. So my experiences have been really positive so far. And I thought the report did an amazing job.
Great, thank you. Ashley had made reference to this as well, but in the report, it talks about how some Indigenous women entrepreneurs see themselves more aligned kind of on the creator side, and that the culture has been passed down to them rather than using the label entrepreneur. And I found that quite fascinating. And I'm curious about your thoughts on that. Tracy, is it okay if I start with you on that one?
Sure. Yes, I agree. When we think about entrepreneur, like Kayla said, I didn't think of myself as an entrepreneur. Women typically take on lead roles in our communities and in our families. So it just kind of comes naturally, right? Yeah.
Absolutely, Tracy. Like, I think that that's so correct. We're just seen as mostly like caregivers, and we take on roles within our families. And that's kind of, I guess, what led me to entrepreneurship, even though I didn't even really see myself as that yet. Mostly I was just like, you know what, I'm a single mom. I gotta hustle. I gotta make some money. I want to pay for my daughter to go into like extracurriculars and things like that. And beading was something that I learned and I guess fell in love with really quick. And it just has, like Ashley touched on it a little bit, art is seen as reclamation of identity and culture. And that's so true. I find that I'm connecting with my culture, and it's been a really amazing journey so far.
When we think about, when both of you talk about not identifying with that label entrepreneur, but also not seeing yourselves as entrepreneurs, and Haley, you talked about how representation is so important. Curious about other thoughts that you have when we think about young Indigenous women and what we can be doing. And it's not necessarily what I don't mean that they assume the label entrepreneur, but them seeing entrepreneurial opportunities as possibilities for them. I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Okay. I guess just personally why I didn't really, and I hope this answers your question, personally why I didn't really see myself as an entrepreneur and is, just because like I just kind of seen it as like this side thing that I can do. But representation is so important. And when you actually do take the time to look, there are a lot of Indigenous successful women, and it's just, it's been so great. Also, like in the Indigenous community, when you have like a skill or a business, I think that it's hard to almost like flaunt it or like talk about it, because you almost don't want to be seen as like better than. There's some lateral violence that like needs to be taken care of, and we've been taught to, like, I think as women especially, to see each other as competition, which we're not. Like Ashley said, there's room for everyone. And so I think that it is just so important when you do see an Indigenous women entrepreneur, especially, to make sure you're uplifting them and taking them seriously.
I totally
Thank
agree.
you, Kayla.
Sorry.
Tracy, go ahead.
I totally agree with you, Kayla, that sometimes the lateral violence in communities is can be overwhelming, and it can put barriers up for us to try different things. But I think it's so important when I see the young ladies in our community with side things, like they're doing the beadwork, the ribbon skirts, a lot of them are using their crickets and creating little businesses with it. And I think it's so important that we support them and encourage them and mentor them. I'm always open to sharing where I got all of my support from. I believe in helping to open doors for others. I give out phone numbers whenever I can. I refer them. I try and help as much as I can in terms of, like, I'll private message people, or because I think as Aboriginal women, we need that extra support. And I think that back when I started, there wasn't that support for me. So now I want to now share what the knowledge that I have learned over the years and encourage others.
Thank you. Tracy and Kayla, what piece of advice would you give to another Indigenous woman considering starting her own business in Saskatchewan?
I would just
Go ahead.
I would just say go for it. Get in touch with whoever you can. Networking is so important, and having discussions with trailblazers like Tracy, who know the ropes already. I would just say really making sure that you use your networks as, I guess, a means for building up your business.
Thank you. Tracy?
Yeah, I agree with supporting, sharing your knowledge, whatever you can to help a young person, and also let them know, like, if there's barriers, don't give up, don't stop because of those barriers. Find other ways to work around it, because the more you open doors, the better off they're going to be.
Thank you very much for sharing your experiences, and we're going to open it up to wider questions in just a few minutes. But I'm going to pull in Monica and Cree at this point. Kayla and Tracy, when you talk about, Tracy, you talked about in the early days, those support organizations weren't there. Some of them are there now and growing importance for them. And Kayla, you talked about, reaching out in the networks, and I think very fitting for us to, speak to Monica and Cree about some of the supports that are available and the work that they do. Monica and Cree, I want to thank you for joining us. And I'm wondering if you might be able to tell us a little bit about the organizations in which you work, and what your organization does and can do to support and grow Indigenous women entrepreneurship. Cree, I'm going to go to you because I see that your mic is open. If you're okay with that, we'll start with you.
Yes, that's fine. My name is Cree Chichu, Business Development Officer. STEVE stands for Saskatchewan Foundation. And well, we're committed to developing a strong economic base among First Nations in Saskatchewan. and continue to assist in the creation of jobs and to foster economic growth. Now, I work with the grant program within SEAF, and the grant program is not technically SEAF, it is INACs, well, ISCs now. So it is still their program, so we still have to adhere by their policies and procedures. We just administer it for them. And yeah, with the grant program, we do startup, expansion, or the acquisition of any businesses. And every grant that we do give out does have to accompany a loan and 10% of the client's equity.
Thank you very much, Cree. Monica?
Good day, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Monica Brunette, and I work with an organization called SMEDCO. So that stands for the SaskMetis Economic Development Corporation. We are the business and economic development hub for the Métis Nation, Saskatchewan. So we are wholly owned by the Métis Nation, and we are the only Métis capital corporation in Saskatchewan as well. And so no, that's a lot of terms and things that we don't normally use, but basically what we do is we work with anybody who is Métis, and that was one thing that I noticed that Ashley brought up in her findings, in her report findings, was that Indigenous terminology. You know, we often get lost in the term Aboriginal or the term Indigenous, right? It's the umbrella term for First Nation, Métis, and Inuit, and we specifically assist Métis entrepreneurs and Métis communities in getting involved in business activities. We offer several different programs where we offer a MAP grant, so that's the Métis Assistance Program. One of the things you will find also in working with us is, and probably all the Indigenous service providers, is that we have a lot of acronyms, and even I get them mixed up sometimes. So the big thing is this MAP program is the Métis Assistance Program, and we deliver that just like Cree does for SEAF. And it is a grant program that we combine with our loans. So we also have a loan program as well. And what we've done is we've combined our grant and our loans so that we can offer our clients low-cost borrowing programs. And so we were established in 1987. So we've been going for 34 years. And at that time, it was set up to be, we were the organization of last resort. And that was, you know, Indigenous people have been entrepreneurs since the beginning of time. Let's just put it out there, right? Whether you're Métis or you're First Nation or you're Inuit, people did what they had to do to provide for their families. And so whether they were trading beadwork or furs and all the, you know, all the things that happened in our history. And it has just now come down to this generation of entrepreneurs. And so, as I said, we were the organization of last resort. However, now we are the preferred organization, as we can offer so many different programs. We are trying to build a Métis community, and we don't exclude First Nation or Inuit people in our community, just that our programs are here to serve the Métis. So we work with entrepreneurs as well as communities. There are a lot of community owned businesses in our Métis communities that are providing goods and services to the community so that they don't have so far to go to get these goods and services. And let's face it, the internet has come out and it has been, you know, a fact of life, especially in this COVID world that we're living in. But until then, there was not an easy way to get goods and services out to our northern communities. And so anyways, we're here to help in any way that we can, whether it's just talking about a project. I've worked in this world for a long time, and I've had people come to me with one idea, you know, 2 years later, they come to me with a different idea and to find out what programs are available. And that's, you know, maybe when they're ready to jump into the entrepreneurship journey. It's been really exciting. Some of the ways people make money and turn it into into businesses is absolutely astounding, because we can get really creative, and it's really nice to have that community to network your business, get people to know who you are. Tracy and Kayla did mention, you know, we try not to brag about ourselves. We've been taught not to do that, right? We don't want to ever say we're good at anything. And that's really unfortunate, because really families wouldn't operate without the mom, without the woman in the family. And so we, you know, just operating our own homes is operating a business. We take those skills and we move them into our business life. And it can be really rewarding to see all the different businesses that we've been able to assist. And even those that we can't assist, you know, it's awesome to see. And I love promoting and talking to anybody who listened to me about all the businesses that we get to help.
Thank you. As you both reflect on the report, Monica and Cree, what did you find as the most valuable or compelling part of the research report for the work that you do in your organizations? Monica, I'll start with you on that one.
Okay, sure. You know, one of the things that has always been there, but didn't really think about it until it was brought up, was the family support and, you know, the childcare and things like that. You know, I come from a huge Métis family, and there's always been people around. When I got married, I moved away, and we were all by ourselves. And we always said we were kind of on an island by ourselves, and we didn't have the support for our children, the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles. I didn't have that. You know, we came back to Saskatchewan when my kids were, I think 7 and 10. And it was then that I realized how nice it was to have somebody that we can call. And so bringing that forward into the business world, I mean, we were employed and had jobs and things like that, but bringing that into the business world for our Indigenous women was something that I hadn't thought about, and how it is such a missing piece.
Thank you, Monica. Cree, your thoughts?
What stood out to me about the report is the barriers that they face. Like we had hosted a Indigenous women entrepreneur workshop in Regina in just this past March. And a lot of the barriers that came up with the women that were participants in that workshop were, of course, access to capital and childcare. Now, a lot of, I know that I think it was on the second, I can't remember if it was the first or second day, but this woman had asked me, you know, I just had a baby 4 days ago. Can I bring my baby in? So I said, oh yeah, no problem. I bring the baby in. If I didn't want her to miss out on the workshop. As soon as the other women saw her with her newborn, they went and grabbed theirs, and all of a sudden there's 3 newborns sitting in the workshop, which I found was great, because I just love the fact that they were able to participate while bringing their children in there. And I think that a lot of my clients, a lot of my women clients, well, women entrepreneurs, they're, a lot of them in the past year have started online businesses, like selling their crafts and doing beading and stuff. And a couple of them actually had no choice to go into something, because they had lost their employment due to not having childcare because of the pandemic. You know, daycare's closed and everything, and you know, they're in a rock and a hard place. They had no choice, but they're flourishing, and I'm so proud of them for doing that. And yeah, I think women entrepreneurs, they're amazing for what they're doing out there. Like I was going through, I did a little report thing before our women entrepreneurship workshop. Once SEAF got the program in April of 2013. So as of April 2013 to the end of March 2021, we have given out 395 grants. 108 of those grants were for women. But the total of the grants that we put out for the women was 2.8 million, which was great. But I just like to, I want to work harder, I guess, to support the women entrepreneurs. Like I find, like through my counterparts throughout Saskatchewan, try and give them referrals to other organizations. Like I know I refer a lot of our clients to Women Entrepreneurs Saskatchewan, to Futurepreneur, and to square one. I refer a lot. So I like that. I like the fact that we have such a wide community of entrepreneurship and support of entrepreneurship that I love that we are able to access.
Thank you, Cree. And to me, what comes to mind when you talk about is kind of that connected ecosystem. So it's it's great to hear that you're drawing on that ecosystem. We have a special guest joining us, so we'll just say hello as well. Monica, you talked about how at one point you were seen to be the place of last resort, and how that's changed. I'm curious if both of you in your organizations and role, if what you have observed as changes in either those who use the services available over the past 2 to 5 years, and if there have been any changes, whether it's the type of services, the types of questions, the types of businesses, the challenges faced, and do you expect that to continue in the future, or do you expect that there will be different needs that emerge? Cree, are you okay if I start with you on this one?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking with the challenges that are faced, like it's like the boundaries that Indigenous women entrepreneurs face. With the Indigenous Women Entrepreneur Workshop that we hosted, we were given funding from our governing body in Ottawa to host that workshop. And it was such a big success that they're actually going to give us funding again this fiscal year to hold another workshop, which I love, but it was very busy. It was very stressful for that part, that couple of weeks leading up to that, but very, very rewarding afterwards, seeing the evaluation forms and how much it helped the women, the participants. And yeah, I think those challenges are going to be faced, like accessing capital, the childcare and everything. But I really liked in the report where it said like trying to push to have childcare in workplaces. I think that would be a big game changer. And as for you said, the types of businesses, like I said, what I'm seeing lately is arts and crafts and clothing, online clothing stores and everything. A lot of lashes, makeup. I'm seeing a lot of that also. But they are money makers, and they are thriving, the ones that are getting into that type of business. So yeah, I just want to sit here and take all their calls and continue helping them out.
Great, thank you, Cree. Monica, what are your thoughts? Have what kinds of changes have you seen in those who use the services of SMETCO over the last 2 to 5 years, the types of businesses or the challenges? And what do you anticipate is coming in the next few years?
Okay. So I mentioned earlier, I've been in the business development world for 18 years now. And I remember when I started thinking, wow, I'm in a man's world here. Because every client I saw, every banking institution that I was dealing with, it was all men. And I remember going home one day and telling my husband, like, I am totally in a man's world. I don't know if I'll fit in. And one of the things that really became or started to change was how many women started coming through the door and how many women became business partners with their husbands. That was something that really that stood out to me, is that the husband was coming in, but the woman was coming in as well, whether she was doing the books or just part of the business, and becoming 50-50 owners. And that was really liberating for me, seeing that happen. And in the last few years with COVID and even the internet becoming a thing. When I first started, we opened up our first web page, and it was like, wow, people are actually looking at this website, and now we're communicating. We're having conferences on this website. You know what I mean? And I think that is really important. I know that it was a federal government initiative to make sure that we had access to internet all over Canada Canada, and especially in those remote communities. But this is giving people in those remote communities like Kayla, like Tracy, who offer goods and services, a way to get their message out there, to know that you can go to Tracy's camp and spend an afternoon on a boat and fish, and she's got a beautiful hotel that I've stayed at, and you know that we didn't even know that was there, right? And so I see women coming out in many different industries, and even taking the position of where men were working in those industries, more women are getting into it as well. Truck driving, things like that, that we've really been able to put our mark on, and it's really exciting to me. So everyone has a story, and I love hearing what they want to do, why they want to do it, and how we're going to help them to get to where they want to be.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Cree. Thank you, Monica, Tracy, and Kayla. We have a few questions for you. Tracy, I have one specifically for you. As Tracy, you mentioned, you left a full-time job to focus on your business. What gave you the confidence to do so and to take up entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I did. That was probably the scariest thing I had to do in my life. I was in, I'm a social worker by trade, so I was in the helping field for a number of years. Worked with child protection, mental health addictions. I took a lead role with our health region, and with mental health and addictions. And the stress that I had from those positions was at days overwhelming, trying to manage family life and work life, and then Tinker's Camp as well. And we thought about it, and we knew that I knew that that role that I had with the working the full time, it was going to take its toll on me, mentally for sure, because of the work that I did. And I just knew I needed to do something else. And the opportunity presented itself where this business come available in Buffalo, and we took a chance, and SMEDCO supported us, and we're so thankful for that. And I guess the rest is history. It's been just a little bit over 10 years since we've owned the motel, and it's a thriving business in our community.
Thank you, Tracy. I have another question, and it's it isn't directed to anyone in particular, but perhaps who might be comfortable or want to answer or have thoughts. If a company wants to know its Indigenous customer base so it can provide more effective service tailored to its unique challenges, opportunities, and barriers for Indigenous customers, is it acceptable to ask for proof of Indigenous identity? Based on your own lived experiences, what could make that experience more welcoming? And is there a good way to ask customers about Indigenous identity? So I don't know if any of you, someone in particular, might have some thoughts or views on that.
I do.
Yeah, Monica, please start. Yeah.
You know what? I have worked with other agencies that provide services to Indigenous customers, and they say to me, how do I know if somebody is Indigenous? Do I bring it up? Do I say anything? Do I offer? And for me, I'm very proud of who I am, and I'm proud to be Métis. So if somebody, and I think most people are, and they're proud to be who they are. So if an organization is talking to me about a program or a service that I might be able to access, and they say, are you Indigenous? I'm not offended by that. And I don't think most people would be. Some people don't look Indigenous, whatever the look is supposed to be, you know, because we all look different, right? But I often say, you can talk about programs that are available to Indigenous entrepreneurs or Indigenous people. And if you fit the bill, then here's something available to you. Now, I think one of the questions was, can I ask? And I don't think it's offensive. I would just bring it up in that there is something that's available to Indigenous people, and that I can share it with them. If they're Indigenous, they're going to say yes, please share it with me. If they're not, they're going to say I don't fit that criteria. I think it's as simple as that, but that's my opinion.
Thank you, Monica. Any other thoughts or opinions on that? No?
Yeah, I'd agree with
Sheila.
Monica that I think that as Indigenous people, we've learned to become very proud of where we come from and who we are. And I don't think that was always a thing, right? With residential schools ending, our ancestors, our grandparents, our great grandparents maybe weren't as proud because they were taught not to be. But I think through over time, we're regaining who we are and like becoming very proud. And I would say that, yeah, it's pretty explicit on my social media that I'm Indigenous because I'm very proud to be.
Thank you very much. Another question we have here posed, aside from the various barriers that Indigenous women entrepreneurs face, what are your proudest accomplishments as an Indigenous woman entrepreneur? Tracy or Kayla? Tracy, something come to mind for you?
Yeah, I think why I am so proud of where I am today, and it's to do with the business, but it's being able to balance that family and work life. I think one comes along with the other. We're able to raise two great sons who work hard in their own right, and we've taught them very well. They work very hard for their families. They also have a supporting role in our businesses as well, because one day it will belong to them. But I think the biggest accomplishment for me as an entrepreneur is being able to balance both my family life and work life, and being able to make that business a success. Sorry.
Thank you, Tracy. Kayla?
Yeah, I can relate, Tracy. Same thing with myself. Just being able to balance family life and work life. But another thing is just paving that way for other young Indigenous youth, women, just being that change, and hopefully they can see that representation and maybe relate to that and maybe go down that path themselves. So I do think that representation is important. And like I mentioned earlier, I didn't really know entrepreneurship could be a thing for me. Education was always stressed. And yes, I did get my education. But yeah, like I said, representation and just hoping that other young Indigenous men, women, youth see that they can do it as well.
Thank you. I have another question here. Are there new trends or changes that you anticipate post-pandemic in terms of Indigenous women entrepreneurship in Saskatchewan? I mean, Cree, you talked about how you were seeing, an increase in the crafts, or sorry, the arts side, as well as even in the beauty side. Some of you've talked about how in some ways, the online shift may have also created some opportunities. Are there others that come to mind for you that you envision are going to happen post-pandemic for Indigenous women entrepreneurs in Saskatchewan?
Well, from the clients that I have been dealing with, they all have started online shops and everything with selling their like their clothing or their crafts or their lashes. But every single one of them had stated that, once the pandemic is over and we're somewhat back to normal, that they all want to open a storefront which I think is great. It opens up to more opportunities out there, more customers, while still having their online. So I think that's a trend that's going to be coming. There's going to be a lot of more storefronts open on that side.
Thank you. And it's also interesting because I know that, when COVID hit and the pandemic hit, and not just, Indigenous businesses, but there were still many businesses, even if they had an online presence, weren't selling through their website. And so it's interesting when you talk about how, many of these new businesses that have started pandemic have started from that online presence, and in many ways, don't have to do that catching up that other business have had to do. So I think that's also interesting.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts from anyone in regards to any other trends or opportunities they anticipate post-pandemic? Monica?
Yeah, I think Cree is right. I think people who were forced to do something because they lost their job or whatever their situation was with the pandemic, they started online and will go into brick and mortar afterwards. But I think that one of the things that we are learning is how we can pivot when we have to. And that's been a really interesting trend to see what people have done. I've seen even, dance studios going online and people dancing in their homes, right? Or whatever it is, and that's really exciting because it opens up more opportunities. And the other thing it does is it teaches our children or the youth that things to look outside the box. Because let's face it, these young people are coming up are pretty creative. They're tech savvy. They're willing to take chances on different things. And it's going to be really interesting to see the type of work that gets done in different communities that gets back to, and I mean, I referred that a lot because a lot of our clients are in the north. And so, if we see people offering goods and services like Kayla in the north, we'll see that come south too. And the borders won't be an issue anymore.
Thank you. We have an interesting question. Each business goes through challenging times. How has your cultural teachings guided you through these tough times?
I would say that resilience is woven in our DNA, and just that drive to be successful and provide for our families.
Tracy?
Yeah, I agree. I think to be very proud of who you are and where you've come from, and learn from your past experiences, and bring that. Always remember, as you move forward in business, remember those teachings that you had from your parents, your grandparents, mentors in the community, but always be true to you and be proud of who you are.
Thank you. We have time for maybe a couple more questions. I have one I'm going to ask, but I'm just putting it out to our audience with us today, or that if you do have a final question to please note it, because we're getting close to our time. One more question I have here though for you. As a non-Indigenous woman entrepreneur who wants to support Indigenous women entrepreneurs, what, if anything, can I do differently when engaging with Indigenous women entrepreneurs? And I'll open that up to any of you who might have some thoughts on that.
I think it just goes back to what I mentioned earlier about uplifting each other and encouraging each other, whether that be maybe promoting an Indigenous business owner on your social media page or something like that. And making sure that, like, if you are looking into purchasing an item yourself, that you're purchasing an authentic Indigenous made item versus maybe some sort of knockoff that's factory made and something like that. That would just be my little piece of advice.
If I can say something too, you know, as women, we all love to chat. We love to talk about what we do. And when we're in a room together, we tend to make friends very easily. And so the thing is if you have an opportunity to network with people who are not Indigenous, and you know, that I think that's a really good way to promote your business to the non-Indigenous community. It's not always easy. It's stepping outside of our box, and I know that. But if you know, can just have the courage to just step outside of your box for a little bit, you'll see that it will come back to you.
Thank you very much. And as we get close to time, what I'd like to do before I kind of give my thank yous and sign off, I'd like to give all of you the opportunity, if there's one final thing you'd like to add before we do clue up, and I'm going to include you, Ashley, in that as well, if there's anything. So I don't know if any of you would like to start, but any final remarks or thoughts as we clue up our conversation today on Indigenous women's entrepreneurship.
Sure, I'll start.
Sure.
I just want to take a moment to thank Monica for inviting me to sit on this panel. It was very interesting. I was a little bit nervous, wasn't quite sure what to expect, but I think it's always important to share any information that you can with others who are thinking about getting into business, and also to people who are already established, like Kayla, you know, like offer support to her, also to promote other people's businesses. Yeah, thank you.
And I'm going to say thank you, Tracy, for saying yes and for being willing to share your experiences today. It's been great. And, you know, when, you know, Kayla talked about representation, that notion of seeing it to be it, so critically important. So thank you. Kayla, I know that you had also had your mic as well ready.
Yeah, I think Tracy and I are kind of on the same thought path here. Yeah, same thing as Tracy. I was a little nervous, but Ashley asked me to join. I'm really grateful that I did, and it was so nice to meet you all. And yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Monica, any final thoughts, comments from you?
Always, always. I just want to say thank you, everybody, for being part of this. And thank you, Tracy and Kayla, for sharing your experiences. You know, this is how we actually get to know other people. And this is how we share our goals and our dreams. We're doing it. We don't even know we're doing it. And being part of things like this, you stepped out of your box. And I congratulate you both on doing that. Because as I said earlier, this is how, you know, I will have remembered that Tracy has this going or Kayla has that going, and if I know somebody that's up in the area, I'll say, hey, do you know that person? Like this is how this happens, and it's always inspiring to hear what entrepreneurs are doing, men, women, youth, whatever the situation is, and just giving them that little bit of acknowledgement for their success. I think that it's always great to hear what people are doing and how they're succeeding in life, and whether you're working for somebody or for yourself, we all have to do something. So we happen to be talking about entrepreneurship, which is something that's very dear to my heart, because I've had businesses in the past and I still have one. So, you know, it would be great that one day we'll actually all be in the same room so we can see each other more than just this little square I'm looking at. But one day it's coming.
That's great.
COVID is coming to an end. So anyways, thank you all for listening to me. And the last comment I'm going to say is, if you know of anybody who's Métis, who's interested in starting a business, who's looking for some supports, programs come and go and change all the time. So don't forget my name. Don't forget my email address. Give me a call or send me an email, and I will try and hook you up with whoever I can that you know might fit your criteria. Okay,
Thank you so much, Monica.
thank you.
Cree, any final thoughts or comments?
No, I just like to say that I really enjoyed this setting, because usually when I'm invited to a Zoom meeting or anything, it's just me reading off my PowerPoint. So I really liked it. It was more relaxed. I was able to talk more freely, I guess. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. So I just want to thank you guys for inviting me to be part of this panel. And if any, like Monica, like if anyone out there who's who wants to start, expand, or acquire a business, just to send me an email or give me a call.
That's great. Thank you so much, Cree. And Ashley, any final comments from you?
Yeah, well, Mmiwg, everyone for attending. It was great to see the Q&A, people participating so much in there. I know earlier I had suggested that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report is a great resource, but when thinking about entrepreneurship holistically and recognizing that we are affected by our entire environments around us, especially Indigenous women, another great report to read would be the National Inquiry into Mmiwg, because that really does a deep dive into a lot of the lived experiences that Indigenous women are bringing to the table. So I just wanted to include that too.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all of you for being here today and being willing to share your experiences. So Ashley, Cree, Tracy, Monica, and Kayla, it's been really great. Thank you. And I hope really the start of our conversations and being able to share and celebrate the voices of Indigenous women entrepreneurs across our province. I also want to thank Kara and Asba, who have done an awful lot of work behind the scenes. Steve as well with us from AV Services. And as I said earlier when I started, Asba really has done all of the work in the coordination and bringing everyone together. And it's been fantastic. And thank you very much, Asba. I also want to, of course, thank every one of you in our audience. So we can't see you in a webinar style, but we know that you are there. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today and making time for this important conversation and asking such thoughtful and engaging questions. So, we will also post a recording of this so that it will be available. And I will put in the plug, of course, for both Tracy and Kayla's businesses. And I might even encourage you to put in links into our chat box just before we go, if you're able to do it. But if not, we will make sure when we post the webinar as well. So you have an audience here now. Let's make sure that they too know where they can get information about your businesses, whether they're looking for a place to stay, or we want some of those fabulous earrings that Kayla and Ashley are both wearing. So again, I want to thank all of you for being here today. And I look forward to seeing you all in person in the near future. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Bye.